Welcome everyone to the NENA Housing Week for 2020, 2022. I know what year it is. And co-hosted with Co-Housing Australia as well. And we're very lucky tonight to have Megan and Sue with us talking about women and housing. I'll let them do their intros, otherwise I'll probably butcher that too, but I'd like to start by acknowledging the country that I'm calling in from. I'm on Wurundjeri country, Woiwurrung and Bunurong lands down here in Naarm in Melbourne. And we always say that it's very important that we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and it's very challenging and fraught to be discussing housing and land ownership and those colonial approaches to land and tenure in the context of that unceded land and in the context of broader reconciliation. And I think all of us understanding how we should and could be living on this country. And I'd also like to acknowledge the climate and biodiversity emergency as another context in which we work and the challenges that that brings to First Nations justice, but also broader social and ecological justice in the context of housing too. So I think we're going to start with a quick straw poll, and Meg's going to hold up a book, I think.
I thought Sue was going to go first for Jenny. That's okay.
Oh no, Sue's going to go first, but we're going to start just to see if people know this book.
Anyone seen? Most probably parents might. The Giving Tree. It's over 55 years old now, I think, 60.
So you can give a thumbs up or an acknowledgement if you've come across this book before.
No? Okay, great. Oh, okay. Reset. Thank you.
Excellent, good to know. So we're going to start with Sue tonight, but she's actually going to read a paper from our other guest, Jenny, who hasn't been able to join us. But this will be a great context setting, I think, for this evening's conversation. So I'll hand it over to you, Sue.
Can you still see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I was having trouble getting the paper up. It's called An Actionable Housing Plan Plus 25 Years, and it was written by Jenny, who was going to be talking tonight, and is really sorry that she can't be here. But yeah, she had a serious health issue. So she's saying that having support is better for the individual, but keep talking to friends, family, or any support network that can be accessed. Do not devalue the stress you are experiencing. A support worker can be really helpful with submitting letters and housing applications on your behalf with Housing SA or with Community Housing. All housing applications are available online, as well as paper applications at the relevant services. Local libraries have free computers with internet and printing, plus a dedicated staff member to help anyone. So ask for help if you need it. Centrelink offices and job network providers have the same services with a dedicated staff member to assist as well. Registering with Homeless Connect SA will place applications into all of the available government housing projects, and you should be allocated a housing support officer. Some very short-term help can be given in dire circumstances. However, for example, when a code blue or red is called, Homeless Connect can arrange accommodation in motels or caravan parks. They do have homeless requirements because of the extreme housing crisis and will not always follow up with an individual once the person is registered. So do not allow yourself to fall through the cracks on this service. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the number is provided. Advising Centrelink of homelessness is an important step, as it will assist you with a personal crisis exemption while homeless, therefore suspending most requirements from the job plan and placing less stress on a very stressful situation. You can still receive any payment while homeless, even job seeker, but you will need a mailing address at least. This can be achieved through talking to your local post office. The job provider themselves can say yes if this request is made, and this means a person will not have to rely on community supports they may not have or want to engage. Consideration needs to be made about the reality of the entire situation because there is a queue of people who get bumped down the list every time someone is bumped up the list. These people can range from the homeless, the desperate, those in need of housing due to medical needs, domestic violence victims as well, and disability needs. Public housing stock is at an all-time low, and while promises are now being made to build more and clean up existing housing stock, there are limited options within Housing SA, and for many years to come, and other organisations like Common Ground or Community Housing Services need to be investigated for suitability for the applicant. For example, Common Ground is only apartment living in the city, therefore offers no parking, and has community gardens and has a community focus with its tenants, so they're involved with and supported by the internal community. The involvement level is up to the individual and always based around personal interest, however. She goes on to write about the Housing Authority. Firstly, and very importantly, because this will prevent all assistance from the Housing Authority. If you are not sure if you have a debt with Housing SA, then call and find out. If there is a debt, then arrange a payment plan immediately. Otherwise, the housing offer will be stopped. And if you have been assessed and your name is already on the Housing SA waiting list, also any bond and rent assistance is not available until an arrangement plan is in place when a debt is owed. Lastly, bond and rent assistance can be accessed for boarding and lodging situations, but as the requirements are different, they will assist with key deposit, 2 weeks deposit and a week's rent in advance. Once you've put in an expression of interest into Housing SA, there must be an appointment with a Housing SA officer to assess the category rating of each individual. This is where being honest about the housing history and options with family or just ongoing support is crucial for a correct assessment, as well as any support letters and supporting documentation. Once this appointment has been finalised, the category assessment will be advised by mail. This letter can then be used to privately approach the other individual housing organisations to request assistance with housing. The Adelaide branch of Housing SA has NDIS support workers in the office on Tuesdays to assist setting up support requirements for those who need it and want to engage in the option available. There may be other days the other Housing SA branches support this engagement, but it will take the assessment and an inquiry with each separate branch as to the available days. On top of the housing category assessment criteria are 3 more tiers: urgent, homeless, primary rough sleeping, secondary car or couch surfing, and personal history shows that private rental is unsuitable as a long-term option. This category can take over a year for you to be housed. Urgent priority as above includes asylum seekers and with their language barriers, and they're assessed long-term barriers, and they're assessed as a category 1. This category can take from 6 months to be housed. Urgent manual as above, but includes high medical needs, either supported or unsupported, with the special factors that significantly affect the ability to find and maintain accommodation. This category should be housed in under 6 months. How to raise your category if you're eligible. Medical conditions. Supply as many individual support letters as possible from your GP, specialist, or specific support services. Epilepsy SA, for example. 2 letters are at minimum, but the more the better. Community references are very helpful, so supply as many of these as possible also. Any information helps, so think of any volunteer work that you do in any community network, from church, community club, school connections, or anyone who knows you on a professional or social basis. Even your job provider, if you get along with them well enough. 2 letters minimum also, but again, the more the better. If relevant, then you will need to supply a copy of an eviction notice or the Form 2A showing non-renewal of lease. It's important to call Rent Right SA. They can help with advocacy support if the tribunal is involved, but they will have up-to-date information on all types of leases and boarding arrangements and be able to advise you correctly about your rights as well as your responsibilities. Acknowledge the notice with the references, but it also helps to show that you've communicated effectively with the requesting vacancy. There are steps that can be taken so that you do not get, in case you get bullied, or if you have if nowhere to go. So if you are still a tenant, it's important to contact Rent Right and stay engaged with them if you need to. And the numbers provided. It goes on to talk about Common Ground being a private organisation that offers means-tested accommodation. The majority of the housing is only in the city, so 1 or 2 bedroom apartments and bed sitters are what they offer. There's no time limit with this accommodation. No car parking is available. However, they all have coded security and are community focused within the building with many community events. Medical and mental health services are on site. If this style of housing is suitable, then a separate individual application can be submitted without accessing housing SA services. The same process for application will be needed with all the support letters provided also, and this could be lodged at Housing Choices if a person wishes to select a particular housing option that they know of. Write a personal email to your local MP. Be factual and honest about the situation you're in and state your housing position clearly, requesting advocacy or support on your behalf. Try not to blame people or circumstances. However, you can certainly be real about your situation. Acknowledge that the Minister's office is busy and you will follow up with a phone call in a few days. Within 5 to 7 days, follow up with a phone call to the Minister's office just to get verbal confirmation of your communication with that office. If the call progresses further at that time, then you're getting a head start. All calls are recorded, so this action enables accountability on their part and allows you to confirm verbally that advocacy is required. This is why providing as much information beforehand is important. If a minister is questioned over supporting a housing decision, then the paperwork is there to show why the person was supported. Repeat this step with the current Minister for Housing and also the Minister for Human Services. Respond to all correspondence from any minister's office so they know that you still require assistance or support. You don't know if they are talking to each other, so assume that they are not until you're assured otherwise. When you are successfully housed, send a thank you email, card or call to all of the relevant ministers for their support, advocacy or service that was provided, despite how you feel personally. It's generally good manners to start with it, but it also shows a level of gratitude on your behalf, regardless, especially because a queue of people had to be pushed down the list for you to be housed. Flatmates can, or other boarding sites through Facebook can be an option for boarding rooms to get temporary accommodation while waiting for secure housing or applying for suitable accommodation. These are all boarding or lodging accommodations with all logistics, expectations, pets, visitors and costs, etc. explained and included. This is not a suitable option for families with children, but there can be some benefits to boarding if you're single or a couple. Domestic violence. A once-off crisis payment is available through Centrelink and can be up to $500 available immediately for any domestic violence victim, male or female, within 7 days. Contact Centrelink directly to arrange this and request to speak with a social worker if your phone contact is not useful. Also, appeal the decision if you feel it was not correct. Your job provider can support you with this matter, but only Centrelink can approve the payment. So it is useful to call from within a Centrelink office to collect the EBT card once approved. And the rest of it is just South Australian housing, different South Australian organisations. And this is very South Australian specific, but Jenny has a long lived experience of homelessness and she's very well informed of what she can do, and she gave me permission to speak on her behalf. So that's all.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Sue. That kind of gave me heart palpitations just listening to all of those things that you need to do and all of the things that you have to think about. And the various options, and I'm sure that is an enormously helpful resource to people going through that in South Australia, and hopefully there are similar webinars for people in other places, because that was just intense to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. It was intense to read.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, thank you very much. We're going to hand over to Megan now. If you can give just a quick introduction to yourself, that would be fantastic. And then we'll come back to you, Sue. And please, everybody, feel free to add any questions in the chat as we go. And we'll try and collate them and get to them as best we can when we move into the Q&A session. So yeah, please jot them down as you think of them so we have them there as a reference. Over to you, Meg. Thank you.
So hi everybody, I'm Meg. I come from an architecture and design background, and psychology, but I'm a single mum. Come to it not by design. So I've put together a small presentation just on the single mother home and some of the reflections and research I've done since becoming one. I was also brought up by a single mother, but that's a completely different story. So we'll just, so hopefully you can just see this. So single mother, the importance of a stable, affordable and appropriate home. And I usually use two different terms, one being a home and one being a house. Home being a situation that supports your belonging, not just your sheltering in place. So it's a dwelling. The big problem, as I kind of see it overall, is that we seem to be faced with a huge inequity of responsibility, and that it's gendered specifically in nature, and that the culture that we live in, unfortunately, and yes, I get the whole feminist vibe, but I'm using the term that contemporary capitalist, post-colonialist, patriarchal society actually stands on what I call the stumps of mothers, and this is the reason I asked about the book at the start, is that the Giving Tree is a book essentially about a tree that just keeps giving to a little boy, and as he grows, the little boy learns to swing and to enjoy the breeze that breaks up the breeze. He loves that her leaves that fall, and when he's hungry, he gets an apple. And then he wants money, and so she gives him all her apples. And over time, as he grows up, basically, he keeps taking. All she wants is for him to be happy, but the tree ends up, I guess, giving herself completely. So I'll go on, but that's just a sort of breakdown if you haven't seen the book. But I'm just using some of the images. This is made in the same likeness as the graphics of the book, but it's not actually in the book. So I'm just going to define terms here. So equality is where we each, either as an individual or as a group, are provided access to the same resources and opportunities. But equality doesn't really happen in the sense, in reality, just as the tree sort of, I guess, leans to one side, just having two ladders that are the same height doesn't actually give us equal access. So it obscures the structural sociocultural practices and beliefs that support case for discrimination, bias and prejudice. So I'm asking not for equality, I'm asking actually for equity. It recognizes that each person or group has different circumstances, and that we need to consider allocating and understanding that the opportunities that will provide and give an equal outcome are far more important than approaching or appealing to equality alone. So the route to achieving equity will not be accomplished through treating everyone equally. It will be achieved by treating everybody equitably, justly, according to their circumstances. That's a little bit, I think, what Jenny was trying to appeal to earlier. So if you didn't know, economic inequity is a huge problem within the single mother parenting situation. And partly it comes on the back of what we culturally understand is that women care. It's our duty to care. It's our duty to be likable. It's our duty to take on the needs of others. So women spend hundreds of thousands of more hours than men, specifically doing unpaid work, because the society that we live in assumes that it's our responsibility. actually it's enforced, as far as I'm concerned. And single mothers are the fastest growing family type across Australia since the pandemic. It's risen horribly, and it's the fastest growing type of family situation in Australia. So more and more families are being led by single mothers. Most single mothers, huge proportion, I think it's over 42%, earn less than $40,000 a year. I'm in that bracket. And that we spend exorbitant amounts to stay housed. So we're in constant rental stress, and that's about 80% of all single parents. So the single mother housing insecurity affects not only our emotional and opportunity costs are built into that, whether we have, and it doesn't matter how educated you are either. I mean, I've got a master's and was doing a PhD before everything fell apart for me. But it does affect and dominoes down your social, mental, physical well-being, and to our children. But if we think about this in context, unpaid childcare in Australia is actually our largest industry. It's 3 times bigger than the largest paid industry, which is financial services. And it's valued at $345 billion. That's back in 2011. And that women do over 75% of the work, but don't get paid. So it begs the question, how and why is secure housing so important? It affects not only the family, as in the single mother family, and the stresses that surround trying to maintain a viable, good, social, moral home, but it also affects the kind of communities that I get to be involved with. I find myself, for example, making sure that other single parents' children are looked after. So we sometimes share the duties in the afternoons, that I'll pick up somebody else's child and they'll pick up my child. And so we share that kind of, and it means it's kind of close knit. But I also find that coupled families, especially when both the mother and father are working, tend to actually rely on single parents to take their kids. The irony is that because they're both so working full-time, I don't get a choice about whether or not I can be there. I have to be, which means I get to be there for their kids too sometimes. So we do all this kind of social work, and again, it's very invisible, I think. Our ability to thrive is detrimentally affected by insecure and unstable housing and inappropriate housing, of course. My son and I, we don't have heating, but we love our hot water bottles. So I don't heat the house, we heat our body. It's been shown, obviously, that education suffers, and every time you move, you actually degrade and retard a child's educational options by about 3 months. And our sense of control and independence is deteriorated, especially every time you have to sort of find and make and develop new community ties. The cost of providing this secure and appropriate housing where we can, that's stable, is not sustainable. So I noticed there's mostly women in this group, so I'm sort of preaching to the choir, but obviously there's a huge, what I call cognitive inequity going on because of the way care relationships and the role of care in relationships is gendered. So you sort of have this emotional inequity. It's never about the dishes. Let me just put it that way. I'm holding all the bags, the shopping, the commuting, the education, sports, social events, presents, meltdowns, celebrations, medicals, traumas, tantrums, triumphs, forget the administration or the maintenance, plan A, B, C, anything that goes wrong. For some reason, the kind of joke is if it doesn't get done, it's because we didn't ask somebody to do it. Nobody asks us. We just have to get it done. There's nobody else. So this gendered inequity is a profound effect, as I said, and it actually generates an intergenerational both bonds and traumas that keep rolling on. So the cost of social immobility, the cost of financial immobility, it's more likely that a child that has experienced homelessness with their parent is going to experience it later in life. But it's actually, for me, as I understand it, built on inequity that is structurally preserved through discrimination and bias and prejudice. We're dangerous, single mothers, to a certain degree. We obviously haven't kept up our bargain of staying in the family situation or keeping them happy or whatever it is. I actually think I'm sort of hoping for the rise of LGBTQI family situations, given that, you start to wonder in my position. Anyway, we're more likely to experience family violence, 42%, given than any other kind of woman in any type of relationship. Single parents and the children make up 64% of people seeking these specialist homeless services that Jenny may have been referring to, and that the fastest growing population of homeless people are women aged 55 and older. And often it's just after, our child's being able to move out of the secure home that we've sort of invested in, that we become homeless. So the trend and the understandings and the research that's going into now domestic and family violence situations, coercive control, financial abuse, for me, I look at them all as symptoms of a sick culture. And we need to fix it. So this is one of the last pages of this book that I was referring to, and it says, and after a long time, the boy came back again. It says, after he'd built a good house and built a boat out of the wood from the tree. And the tree says, I'm sorry, boy, but I've nothing left to give you. Sorry, the first time I read this story to my son, it hit me, but it didn't seem to challenge him. He was very, 2 or 3 at the time. But when I read it to him again, when he was 5, and obviously after the separation, he couldn't hear. And I found a reversion of it that's about healthy boundaries. So I was going to talk about coping mechanisms and how that affects the way societies, the fabric of society works with each other, and how relationships sort of move through periods. But I really like this part where she says, look, I was all fine with giving you the apples to help you get on your feet, and they'll grow back next season anyway. But no, I'm not going to give you hats. I've seen boys like you pull this kind of nonsense with other trees in the forest. First, it's the apples, then branches, and the trunk. And before you know it, that mighty, beautiful tree is just a stump. So I don't go down like that. I appeal to an ethical equity. And the reason I talk about this is there's a difference between instrumental moral reasoning, which tends to be how governments work to provide sticks and incentives, so sticks and carrots, to incentivize people to do things. Whereas I'm looking for an intrinsic moral standpoint, reasoning. So appropriate, affordable, secure housing for single mothers and their children naturally builds healthier children and families and the communities that they tend to serve, which resonates through the culture. Cultivating healthier individuals and communities provides opportunities. We share our resources. It's just part of the parcel for us. We can't think any other way, I find. We're trying to elevate respect and empathy, and it motivates the small local enterprise situations, which robustly kind of helps encourage the care and compassion through diversity, through the stranger, through the other. The idea that we become more resilient, more diverse, more productive, and responsive in our local ecosystems. So I'm kind of appealing to a hyperlocal economic flourishing that's both informal and formal. And so in the end, can we please equitize responsibility and have a more intrinsic moral centering to the way we practice and get along with families? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Meg. That was amazing. Some of those statistics are very telling. The billions of dollars on unpaid childcare blows my mind. And at the same time, totally doesn't, I guess, in equal measure. But here we are spending so much time talking about mining jobs and
Mining and building.
yeah, and I can see your eyes, burst out of your head. An acknowledgement of that hypocrisy, and it is just laughable. If you have to laugh and just to stop from crying, and also, that I've seen in loads of places and forums that sort of say single mums are the best tenants that you can get because they will walk over hot coals to keep their kids in, a secure housing situation, to keep them engaged in school and whatever networks they've managed to establish. And again, that's kind of just speaks to that issue of basically being able to exploit people to a far greater extent. Other people who have a lot more flexibility have the luxury of being able to move potentially, but single parents are really, they're really up against it. So thank you for calling it out, and hopefully we've got lots of allies here tonight. Sue, I'd love to bring you back in to introduce yourself again and to share your perspective. And please, everyone, remember to keep dropping your questions into the chat.
So, yes, I introduced myself as being fiercely freelance and an unashamed tree hugger. And that's a good enough introduction, I think, to start. I'm delivering this talk on beautiful unceded Kaurna Yata of the Adelaide Plains, and this place that I call home. I'd like to acknowledge the long history of this place and how that history has shaped the land and the stories and the knowledge of country and it's exactly what sustains us. And here I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my deepest respect to the local Kaurna peoples and all First Nations peoples' ongoing connection to culture and to everything that we loosely call nature. And I'm very grateful to those who so generously taught me some of their knowledge and their stories. And the place that I'm going to be talking about too is also known as Christie Walk. And I put the name of the organisation in the chat. I was going to put some photographs up. Christie Walk is incredibly beautiful, but and I think it's really good to sort of end a talk like this on a positive note, because Christie Walk is on a positive note. But it also just felt a little bit wrong showing off or something like that in this particular panel. And so on the Urban Ecology website, you'll see all the photographs, and Urban Ecology is the organisation that facilitated the development. So this Christie Walk, it's where 45 people live in 27 households on 2,000 square metres, with around 30% of that 2,000 square metres being green space, including a really flourishing roof garden. And we share it with lots of birds and bees and plants and trees, and it all fits like it belongs and like it's always been here. And it is an incredibly beautiful place. There's 4 straw bale houses, and it's in the middle of the city, well, not in the middle, it's in the south side of the city square. And I believe it might be the only one of its kind that is actually in the city square mile of a community that houses this many people. It's a beautiful place, and I feel very lucky to be able to be here. And one of my passions in life is to collect and share stories, and particularly the stories that I collect are particularly about what individuals or people who want to commit to telling a story, what their take is on what a sustainable and inclusive future might look like. And I've really not had too many people saying no, they don't want to tell their story. It's something that that most people really like to do. And it is part of human nature to tell stories, and it's been going on for millennia in this country. So this is a little bit of a story also about me. Some part of my story is that for many years I worked and studied in the disability field. I have a degree in it and I have postgrad qualifications in the field. I sat on boards locally, nationally, internationally. I worked internationally too in the field. And in all of these places, I would confidently discuss with my colleagues a whole range of issues pertaining to people living with disability. And I'd confidently give advice to people on what's needed, how to deliver it, and what fits for their particular circumstance. And here's the irony. I got one. I got a disability. I acquired a disability. And none of the theoretical knowledge that I'd been sprouting actually helped me at all. Because while it was real, the knowledge that I had, it didn't even attempt to address how it feels. It didn't attempt to address anything about the emotion of it. And that whole thing just proved to me how much lived experience is so important. And I call it a bit of a delicious irony because it changed the way that I looked at things. I thought I knew about it and I was wrong. And that was 22 years ago. And so I've been considered disabled for 22 years and I'm still not used to it. I still think maybe I'll get better, but who knows? So I put my name down to live in what's now known as Christie Walk when I was able-bodied and owned my own home. It had never occurred to me that I could end up disabled and on a pension. And we all could. It could happen to any one of us in a flash. It's one of those things that can happen to anybody. And I would never have been able to afford to live here, which is one of the points that I want to make later, if I was still paying a mortgage or paying rent. And the other thing about disability, and I think it's particularly with women, is that people treat you differently. When I first acquired the disability, I was in a wheelchair, but fortunately I've been able to get around for years now using a walker. If I'd have remained in a wheelchair, I wouldn't have been able to live here because it's not accessible. And that's not a criticism of the place, it's just the way most buildings are, especially when space is a premium. And space is a premium, and I take up much more space here than most because of my walker. I joined a group called Women with Disabilities and found out all sorts of information that women living with disability have huge problems with housing. They're high up on the list when it comes to domestic violence, and many can end up in nursing homes just because of the lack of access or accessible homes, accessible accommodation. Those statistics came from a group that I used to belong to called VAWD, which was Violence Against Women with Disability. And the statistics are actually horrifying. And there's another little twist to my story that I was quite excited when the NDIS came in because I thought I could do things like self-manage and do all sorts of things. But then it turned out that it cuts off when you turn 65, because when you turn 65, you're just considered old. You're not considered disabled, just old. So that makes a whole lot of sense. So I was not eligible for the NDIS. And the other thing that's just a complete and utter waste of time and money is that when you're old, you have to be reassessed. So I'd been living with a disability for a while. I knew exactly what I needed. I had exactly what I needed, but I had to be reassessed because I was now old. Old people have different needs, apparently. And it cost me $300 to do that, and it would have cost the government a whole lot more to do that. And it's just a nonsense because they were the same handrails, that nothing changed. Everything that I said that I needed was exactly what I needed. Funny about that. But it's, yeah, like I said, a complete waste of time and money. But the experts insist. And that's the whole thing about this experts. Experts come and tell us what to do. They tell us how to do it. And they don't necessarily know what the lived experience is like. And I think that's probably the same in most situations, but in your situation, Megan, I'm sure it was the situation in Jenny's situation. And, you know, part of her issue is part of the reason why she couldn't be here tonight. And that's that's a real shame, because Jenny had her story is huge. But ageing in place is also an issue, even though you're not considered disabled, it's still an issue, because you need, wherever you're living, you generally need more space when you're aging, and there's all sorts of things that with aging in space that you don't think of when you're younger. You don't even consider that, you know, you might need more space, you might need more, you might trip over pavers, where there's all sorts of things that accessible housing actually doesn't do. You know, you don't have pavers, you don't have the whole range of things that we just take for granted in gardens and stairs. When I first acquired the disability, I had a house with stairs, and of course I had to move, and that was before I actually came to Christie Walk. But, you know, I'm comparing what my story because it's this particular session, but compared to many women living with disability, and to Jenny's story and Meg's story, mine is trivial, but I did raise it for a reason. And to me, it is the root of a lot of our problems. It's these experts. As a society, we have experts telling us what we need. And when it comes to issues, most issues, housing, homelessness, diversity, inclusion, politicians, who are not necessarily experts anyway, they tell us what we need. And it is so wrong. If you want to find out something, ask the people who live it, not the ones who claim to know. So I live in a very beautiful place, and when you get into the middle of it, the birds drown out the traffic. You can't hear the traffic, you can just hear birds and wildlife. And we have a lovely community, and people acknowledge my disability. We have a vegetable garden that I can't get to, so I quite often open my back door and there's veggies from our garden that someone's just popped there, and because they know that I can't get there. And my compost, I just put it outside my door and it magically gets emptied. So that's pretty good. And, you know, there's all sorts of things that like that, where we're living in a community. People can actually care about each other. You know everybody. You care about each other, and you do what you can according to your ability and according to what you like to do. And we have various working bees and things like that. And that's what happens with community. People take on the things that they like to do, but they also take on things that maybe other people can't do. And there's another thing that has happened quite recently that's really, to me, is quite magical, is I offered to become a real estate agent for some people who owned an apartment here and wanted to rent it out to a family that had just arrived from Afghanistan. And by me being the real estate agent, they could knock off 10% from the rent, so that the family could live cheaper. And what it's done, and living in a community is wonderful because it facilitates things like that. And what's happened now is I've just extended my family, they've extended their family, and they're learning English much quicker than I'm learning Persian. But there's a little 4-year-old, and it was on, I put the phone on speaker when I asked them, could I talk about them in this particular talk, and they're on speaker, and I said, I'm so, you know, like it's shared. I asked, do you know the meaning of the word reciprocal? And I said, no, not reciprocal, shared. Do you know the meaning of the word shared? And yes, absolutely. And I said, well, you know, what I get from this is I've got an extended family, and I love having a little 4-year-old in my life. And she yelled back at me, and I love having you. And I just think, well, there you go. It doesn't really get better than that. So I guess that's pretty much all I wanted to say. In terms of Christie Walk, there's much more that can be said about it, of what we do here at Christie Walk and how we do it and how it gets managed. But in this particular one around women, I think that that's probably enough. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Sue. That was excellent. I think yeah, there's a lot for lived experience, and I was under the impression, I guess, that the health sector is sort of supposedly leading the way in acknowledging the value of lived experience in kind of informing. And I know Meg's laughing, but it just shows how behind I think every other sector is, that even in kind of psychology and health, where these sorts of things are talked about, it's still sort of so far behind, and certainly in every other field it's even further behind. And also I think in terms of research into housing, a lot of that research is only happens when the funding comes through the health sector. And so there's a lot hinging on, I suppose, that interaction of the funding, and also the interaction about how we start and hold these conversations, and the relationship between that sort of expert approach and actually really meaningfully engaging with people. I wonder if either one of you would like to reflect on that a little bit more.
Well, I think that you said the health sector is leading the way. I think I feel very sorry for doctors at the moment, because I think they don't have time to spend. But I don't see really how the health sector is leading the way in a really, because like in 2019, the previous government, Greg Hunt, suspended all treatment for people going to naturopaths for natural treatments. And, you know, natural treatments are probably the only way that you'll ever get somebody to look at you as a whole person. And you know, you go to a doctor, you have something wrong, and they fix whatever the problem is. They don't. There's no fixing the whole person. So whereas a naturopath does, they look at the whole of you and the social emotional side of it as well. So it's sort of, I think it's endemic in our society that that we have experts telling us what to do in pretty much every field.
I second what Sue's saying, but I also sort of take up the problem that we've medicalized society. We've hugely medicalized our governmental systems. Apparently, all of society's sick. And I kind of use the term that I think, you know, all the issues we're facing with inequity, inequalities, and discrimination, all these basic relationship problems that we're building a better language to express actually are symptoms, in the sense that we've medicalized even our view of being. You know, you sort of wake up and we don't ask, we ask, how are you? As in, are you well? You know, it's a basic prescription. But the emotive capacity, the empathy, the compassion, the things that actually tie you to being in the world, to dwelling in your home, to you know, wanting to wake up where it is you went to sleep. Those things aren't medicalized, and the only expert that can ever answer those questions for you are you. I think to a large degree, design from my field in architecture actually has a lot to answer for, as far as the health, sense of security, sense of place, sense of being, the way that colonialist concepts have divvied up land and not seen it as a part of an ecosystem, not seen it as living and alive. We do maintenance. We don't care about buildings. We maintain them. You know, it's actually divorced of the care attitude that's feminized and produced down a... Anyway, I'm not going to keep going on that one, but you can see the way I sort of come to it. And I think it's really trying to appeal to a holistic, multi-perspectival, empathic approach would be really great.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the way that we treat health is similar to the way that we treat housing, in that we've individualized it all, rather than there's sort of not enough happening in that public health space, just the same way that there's not happening in the sort of societal understanding of housing as its contribution to social benefit through housing a population and housing them in relationship to one another and in relationship to the natural environment. We've separated everything, and we've separated everyone, and everyone is meant to have their shit together, basically, and and not rely on each other, and not have those opportunities to share. And it's and I mean, I think there are people who are really at the edge, but I think everyone is sort of suffering in that system. And yeah, some people just, unfortunately, obviously a lot more than others. There's a few questions in the chat that are coming through. So Lauren, are you there? Would you like to come on and ask your question?
I feel like you might have already asked it, Eleanor. I was just interested to know how speakers feel lived experience when it comes to housing and homes can best be valued and engaged with and expressed by the organisations that care about these issues. I feel like you might have already answered it to some extent, so I might be doubling up here.
Welcome to jump in if you have further answers while I look through the next questions.
I'm semi-fortunate enough to have been able to stay in private rental agreements, but the biggest one that I understand is the lack of agency, in the sense if you can somehow provide people a sense of enduring agency over their space, they will look after it. You know, like you were saying before, single parents tend to, for me, it's about making sure that my son's education is as stable as possible. In a good school, in a good area. It doesn't matter how size the apartment is, I'll make do and I'll look after it and I'll make it as homely as possible. But if I didn't have that option, you know, if I couldn't, like I was saying, figure out a way to have spatial agency enough to lay my head and want to wake up the next morning, I wouldn't be here. You know, and there are, like, it's last number of affordable private rentals in Melbourne for people under, you know, 30 grand a year on job seeker and stuff. There just aren't any. So I'm petrified of losing it.
And Jackie and Steve, are you there? Would you like to come on and ask a question?
Oh, hi, it's Jackie. Yeah, mine was more just a comment. I just recently retired from being a GP practice nurse, so the health issues are really something that rings true to me. And that was one of my biggest frustrations, that there was always time and money constraints, whereas I wanted to treat the person in front of me as a whole person, looking at their housing situation, looking at their food security, all those things, looking at their mental, emotional, physical health rather than just the physical. So it needed to be a multi-D team so that all those factors were looked at and supported rather than just the health, because that's often the byproduct of all the other. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think secure housing plays a big part in other people, in every other element of health, and having that security and not having the stress of needing to move. I think, as Meg said, the cost to children's education every time you move, and I think people have said that moving is sort of the equivalent of it's the equivalent of you know, other significant life challenges, and it means that you have to rebuild those social ties, and you potentially have to work out even just simple things like how you might get to the job that you previously had, or how you then get your kids to the same school, or do you have to change schools, and all of those sorts of things all pile up. And of course you don't have time to spend on other things that you should be doing for your health, be it mental or physical and financial health. So I feel like housing is so foundational. It's just atrocious that we have turned housing from that idea of home and dwelling into a speculative financial asset. It's quite insane, really. I really just can't even comprehend it, to be honest, even though it's completely there. I still can't actually get my head around it.
Can I just comment on that too? Like living in the city, there's a lot of apartment buildings, and people pay $1 million to never see anybody. It's so weird. They have a little flicker on their garage so that they can just drive in and never see anybody, to see their neighbour or anything. I'm doing this talk because I expected to be doing it with Jenny in our community room, and it's a meeting room, it's a games room, it's a table tennis room, it's an everything room, and it's always being used. And why would you not want to know your neighbours? It's very weird. I don't understand it either.
Yeah, I was talking to someone recently, and they were describing a new apartment block that they were considering moving into, and they happened to have a friend of a friend who lived there, and you know, she talked about the light and different elements of the building, but she also said, oh yeah, and we never see our neighbours, and I kind of said, oh, was that in the pros or the cons category? Because it was sort of unclear, and the person who I was talking to said, oh, I think it was in the pros category, as in like you're not adversely affected or offended by anything they do because the acoustic separation is good, maybe.
Yeah.
It was just kind of very bizarre, because I heard it as you probably would have, Sue, and thought, oh, that's really a shame. If I moved in there, I'd start a WhatsApp group instantly and be that weird person at number 7.
Exactly. You paid $1 million for that?
I think you touched on something there, though. There's privacy, semi-private, public space, and in the sense that even with very well-designed apartments, and I actually think 90% of the apartments being designed and built at the moment are horrific as far as trying to deliver the social cohesion, social trust. It doesn't actually contribute to that. It actually takes away from it, and society suffers as a consequence. We don't trust each other. We expect the worst of each other. And it's because they're built terribly, like as far as insulation is concerned, acoustic setbacks, the ability to have semi-private space in front of your place. Jane Jacobs in New York was an amazing observer of social happening, and noticed how before Moses came in and put up high-rises, much in the likes of the Corbusier, like we've seen the high-rise boxes that become, you know, vertical ghettos. She was sort of suggesting that actually the street's alive. People look after each other's kids because they're in the trust zone. They're in our eyesight. And culture learns, you know, people in those societies learn that you can trust a stranger. You can sort of meet the neighbor as the not other. Does that make sense? So I think the way contemporary design has gone, which has been based off the needs and outcomes of war and the atomizing of these, you know, local cultures, is what we're living is now the sort of last ripples of that kind of economic rationalist design. And then even then when people sort of go out and put this, you know, lovely skin on it that they think is lovely and I think are horrific, it ends up being this kind of like makeup facade, and then we live behind the facades of our own disgust, and I find that so shameful. Sorry about that, just ranted.
No, that's totally fine. That's what we're here for. Anyone else who wants to come on and have a little rant is most welcome to. But I think that that's true. And the foundation of housing, in order for households to have that social reproductive capacity, so that capacity to do all of that caring work, also extends to their capacity to be able to then engage beyond their front door. And it requires both the household capacity, but also those social spaces and that physical and social infrastructure of our buildings and urban environments in order to hold and foster the emergence for that social capital. And then that in turn builds trust and reciprocity and connection and relationality and all of those amazing things. I wonder maybe if that's sort of a conversation around generosity and how that interacts with what you were both talking about in terms of how we approach people, but also spaces, and where you think there's an opportunity for that to happen in housing.
I can comment. In Christie Walk, there's spaces that are designed for people to bump into each other. So you can't actually go down the path to the back of the complex without bumping into people, essentially. And you know, it so often happens that that you walk down and you just. You've got to allow 10 minutes before you go anywhere. You've got to allow an extra 10 minutes because, you know, so you can chat to people along the way when you're going somewhere. And the actual space is everybody's. The gardens are everybody's. The resources are shared. They're everybody's. And you've got your own private space when you're inside your place, but all the rest of it is shared space, and that encourages there's a sort of a responsibility that you don't I didn't understand before I moved in here, that like just for argument's sake, like there's 27 households and we all pay 1/27th of the water. Now that includes a family that might have 4 people living there. They'll use a lot more water than I would living on my own, but we all pay 1/27th, and that shared obligation it's never done unwillingly. We all do it, and we do it willingly because it's all part of the whole, and you're part of a bigger whole, and I think that that's really important. And the resources belong to everybody. The garden belongs to everybody.
Just waiting to give you a chance, Meg, to see if you wanted to come on and share anything further. There's just another long comment come in. I've only got a chance to read the first bit so far, just around people who, yes, want to feel securely locked behind their door. I think what Sue's describing and what Mary Faith put in the chat in terms of co-housing is very much, I think, the sense that people have their own private space and have that in the context of community. So you can very much have your privacy when you need to, but you also have community when you want to. Whereas I think traditional development models mean that you can have privacy when you want it, and you also don't get community, but you don't get community because it frequently takes a huge amount of time to organize to catch up with people. Everyone is so busy and stressed, that you have to book in to see friends, you know, mountains of time ahead. And then if you just don't feel like it that night, then you think, oh, well, now I have to go because it took us 2 months to organize this. So I might not see them again till the next year or something like that. Whereas at least in the context of a connected community, if you do want to just go and chat to someone, then you can, that's an option. Is there anyone else who wants to come on and ask some questions or share some stories?
Hi, it's Jackie again. So just a question for Sue. Is there, on the website for Christie Walk, is there the history of it and how it all came about? It'd be great to find out how it all happened in the first place so that we can perhaps replicate something similar. Yeah.
I've been trying to replicate it for the 16 years that I've lived here, and because it's a model that works. It's not perfect by any means, but it works, and I would love to see something happen where it could become like part aspirational housing and part social housing, have that combination, so you have that whole sort of village like community feel, but developers rarely understand that, and yeah, so I've been sort of bashing my head against a brick wall. But in terms of the way it happened, it's a very long story, and it was full of knocks along the way, and things that were supposed to happen that didn't happen. So the fact that it did happen was huge, and that it's now been in existence for 20 plus years, and it's a thriving community. But it was hard. It was really hard, and I put my name down, like I said, when I was able-bodied, and saying that I wanted to live in this place, and it became a different place than the one that was originally there, and we even got involved in the development. I worked in a regional organisation at that time, and got involved in the whole process. It was in Whyalla actually, and we were looking at we built sustainable toilets. We planted thousands of trees. We had a core site and had a railway carriage that operated as a cafe, and the architect was behind all of that. And money talks. The land ended up being sold for a car park. It was all knocked down. The whole lot of it was knocked down. So unbelievable that happened. And the architect and his partner, she was very much a driver of this project as he was. They kept on until this place did happen, but there were lots of knocks along the way, lots of hard knocks along the way. And also the other thing that made it quite different was that there was a community to start with of people who were really keen on seeing this happen, and there were some benefactors. Government put in nothing to the actual building. They gave us a grant to put in a mural after. It was a reality, but in terms of assisting in the development of it, there was no government input whatsoever. It was all private, and so that's the only way it would have happened. It could have happened. So that's always a bit of a block. But these days, with all the sort of impact grants, social impact grants, and all the different ways of investing, you would think that somebody would take it up.
There's a lot of different, market forces on at the moment, and I guess now we've got interest rates rising. It already kind of sets a bar that's problematic. When the interest rates were low, that was an interesting one, seeing superannuation funds like Hester, and I think even Host Plus to a certain degree, because they have to look after hospitality, which is, low paid, long hours, and people with lots of money want them, on standby to make them coffee first thing in the morning. I just find the lack of the way property prices starts to affect the diversity of communities means that certain sectors are actually losing people. So, for example, it's really hard to get a barista. That's actually an outcome of urban planning. And to a certain degree in Australia, has a very narrow view of the way it treats and considers equity in property. If you look at the Vienna model, for example, they've been able to maintain a really consistent pressure on rents because the state basically, as Vienna, the city, owns almost 80% of the housing stock there. It's extraordinary. And they actually have communities come to them, come to the council. Council will supply them with a developer and an architect and a builder to work together. The community sort of helps fund it, but it's all kind of done within the parameters that are set by, the government. So it has to work with what's existing. And I find that's an extraordinary point of view, whereas here we don't have that. It's actually at the other end that kind of drives it. It's litigious, and can you make the return in 8 years? On the current market and the shortage of materials at the moment, and it's amazing. You can't get a chippy for the next 6 months at the moment, let alone whether they've got the material. But to a certain degree, builders are really, privileged place in society's, this culture's landscape, because of the way we financially consider property as an investment. The amount of houses that are standing empty costs more to put somebody in them than it does to have them just sit there empty. The incentives for the way we understand dwelling and shelter is all wrong in Australia. And just, heartbreaking to see how many, the diversity of models that have taken it differently, especially across Europe, because they've had to house people. You can't throw people out of a squat in Berlin in the middle of winter. There's a death sentence.
Yeah, very. No, and you can see it every time that there's a conversation at the federal level and even at the state level in terms of housing instruments. They always talk about the supply side, and that is always, while that funding is great for the sort of emergency end of housing, and we desperately need it, it also feels like it's as much jobs for boys as it is housing. And there is nothing in that space in terms of actually gaining access to all of those empty properties, as you say, and to changing taxation settings so that people can't accumulate housing in the way that they do.
But the worst part is, though, and maybe it's just me again as a single parent kind of seeing it this way, but it's horrific that the quality of these buildings, they're not designed for you to want to live there for longer than 8 years. I mean, most people flip it within 7. So they're not really stable housing in the sense of bringing up children. So they're kind of antithetical. But society leverages the possibility of the wealth in property on the backs of the care attitudes that it's taken. And yet we have to say thank you. Thank you for cutting my branches off, for taking all my apples, for taking the trunk. Here, sit on my stump. I'm not happy with that. I want some healthy boundaries. This is not okay.
Completely fair enough. I'd like to ask Mary Faith if you'd like to come on and tell us a little bit about your project.
Thanks, Elena. I'm from WINC, Older Women in Co-Housing, which is trying to build an older women's community either in Daylesford or in the Castlemaine area. It's looking a little bit more like Castlemaine at the moment. And it's been 5.5 years now getting to this point, and we're ready to make an offer on a piece of land. And but it's so interesting to hear how we had to get there in the sense of some of the things we've been talking about tonight. Sort of hard to know where to start, but we now have about probably almost 30 members, ranging in age from 50 to 78 or so, but most of us, I'd say, are 60s, 70s. And it's a wonderful group of people, and we've been building the community for that long, and that has given us great strength, which helps. But and we want to have a mixed tenure model. So we're planning to have 4 homes for social housing, which will be owned by a community housing provider, but we'll have nomination rights for that. Then we have probably about 10 homes for what we call middle women, who are women who have too much for social housing, too many assets, but not enough assets to buy in. And we don't yet know exactly how we're going to fund them. They have to have, let's say, somewhere $160,000 to $200,000 to be able to contribute, and there are some do. And yes, I'm aware there's a gap between the end of the housing register, which in Victoria is 35,000 in assets, and the beginning of where we'll be able to fund it. But if the middle women housing is too low, we can't do the whole thing. So then there's another 15 homes for women who have the good fortune to be able to buy in. But in order to do this, and we want a community housing provider to be our developer, we're too old to take the risk of being our own developer because we can't remake the money that we could potentially lose. So a model like property collectives, which is a terrific idea, works better with younger people. They also might have more money than we have. And then, so anyway, we want a community housing provider to buy us, but as you know, the government doesn't give them all their money. So in order to get them to help us out, we have to have some incentive. And what we think the incentive is that we have to buy the land ourselves and get a planning permit on it. Now, then we would sell it to whoever's going to develop at what we paid for that. But, and because we've then basically we intend to buy off the plan, and everyone, I mean, there's not a huge risk because we have all these members who are ready to buy. But so we're now in the process of creating a unit trust. I've learned lots of things about this, a unit trust to be able to buy the land. And then we have a trustee company, which consists of the 10 or so women who have the good fortune to have some money to put in there. So we have shareholders who have either 50,000 or 100,000 that they can risk. I hope I'm not risking it too much, but put in so that we can buy a piece of land and pay for the planning application, and then go to a community housing organization, or if we have to another developer, and say, we've bought this land, we've got a planning permit, will you build our homes there for us for a reasonable price? So this is the stage we're in, and it's very exciting. I look forward to the next seminar where I can say we've got a piece of land, and it's a wonderful group of people. It's all that community that you've been describing, and it'll be wonderful when we get there. That's probably enough detail for now for this group.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, we can't wait to see that presentation either. I have a standing webinar waiting for you with your name on it. Don't worry. I think you could fill a year though with all of the stories that you've been through. Are there any other quick questions? We're getting close to the end of the session, so feel free to come on if you have any last burning questions. While you do that, I'll pop the link to the rest of the NENA Housing Week in the chat. We've got a couple of sessions on tomorrow in lunchtime and the evening. In the morning, at lunchtime, we're going to have Jasmine Palmer, Carl Fitzgerald and Sidsel Grimstad on to talk about creative ownership tenure options for Australian housing. So hopefully some of those will be also looking at these issues as well. And in the evening, we're going to have a robust dialogue between Louise Crabtree-Hayes and Michelle Maloney, who will unpack, I think, a lot more of these sorts of issues, I guess, all of the context that has led to the conditions that we have been discussing this evening. Just scanning through the chat to see if there's any last questions. Well, thank you both so much. I think the NENA Housing Week is partly about getting everybody together again to discuss these issues, but also very much around trying to capture the ideas and potential solutions or things that we want to take to various levels of government or to other people who live and play in this sector. So I don't know if there's just kind of one or two things that each of our speakers would like to share that they think governments could do, or it could be a particular level of government or a particular player in this space. What would you be advocating for them to do in order to change the situation and facilitate more opportunities in the market for women in housing?
Do you want to go first, Meg, or will I?
You please.
I'd like them to understand that it's actually cheaper and easier and better for the planet, better for resources. I'd like them to understand that. I wish I could get into their ear and get them to understand that. It would cost them far less if they used a model like this one or the other one or any of the other ones. It literally is cheaper and you have more because you're sharing. So your capacity is for more. And I don't know why they don't get that. Because I guess I do know it's all about growth at all costs, isn't it? Yeah. But you can still have that sort of growth, but it just needs different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the money that we spend on emergency services and health and education and justice system and all of those things, yeah, it doesn't really take into account. I mean, the money that they spend up front, it would be nothing in comparison to that. And you know, if they had just bankrolled the Wink project in Daylesford or Castlemaine, and all of these women had been in that housing potentially for the last 4 of the 5 years, they would be contributing so much more back to that community right now and would have been for a very long time and for a very long time to come. And the opportunity cost of that breaks my heart. Meg, any?
Yeah, I'm going to be that person because I don't think governments, it's not in the government's best interests to look after the best interests of its citizens. I know that sounds terrible, but it's just never has been. Actually, governments have to ensure suffering to a certain degree to enable the platform to get elected on. To a certain degree, this reverse engineered poverty is actually the outcome of a system that government's just a part of. Kind of like, looking at how Moderna and these pharmaceutical companies got to respond to the pandemic. So much, many millions of dollars were spent in advance so that they could build the services and build the infrastructure and build the things for society. But, somebody made an awful lot of money. The idea, the government's not there to save us money, they're there to make them money. So my problem is to stop needing to rely on handouts from government means that society actually has to say, we can do this. All the money that government uses is ours anyway. We earned it, we make it, we share it. And this financial economy only makes up 37% of the broad economy about how we share, trade, and support each other. It's a small wedge if we think about it. But the perspective the government gives us is that's the only perspective, the economic view. And that is not where we live. So I kind of want to break away from this idea that governments, you know, if only we ask them nicely, if only we show them enough gratitude, if only I send them a bottle of wine, you know, every time they send me my my job seeker check. What? It's never going to be that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's sort of particularly why I said not necessarily just government, but other players in the sector. And I think you're completely right. The opportunity to use participatory processes extends to building that kind of scaffold so that we can do it together. We can do it ourselves, but ourselves together. Mary Faith, did you have any reflections?
Well, yeah, we just want to, we do want to demonstrate the model and then just give it away. And I suspect there'll be plenty of people who want to do that. There was recently an article about the Baba Yaga house in France, and what they did, older women, they did a cost benefit analysis of what it would save the government if they had housing, as in co-housing, really, save them in all the different dimensions. And while I appreciate what you were saying, Meg, about it's not, it would be nice if we could work outside of government, and we will. But in the meantime, if we could convince them that we will save them money, and therefore, if they could just give us a small hand to get this thing going, that could be worthwhile.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Well, we've just kind of crossed over time, so I want to thank our speakers very, very much for sharing your time and wisdom tonight, and also for everyone for coming along to listen and to share your comments and questions and experiences as well. Make sure you tune in for the rest of the week, and I also really encourage anyone who can to please come along to the Friday session. We're going to be talking about co-housing then as well with Robin Allison, who's visiting from New Zealand from Earth Song. And then there'll also be a roundtable conversation, which will really be hoping to capture all of the great wisdom that's come out of the whole week and compiling that into NENA strategy and hopefully feed into a new program that they're getting up and running, which is called NENA Town, which is kind of envisaging a kind of utopia and that will be happening, I think, in greater detail next year. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and go well, and see you for the rest of the week.